Hi, I'm Jay, and this is my self-reflection video at the end of we're coming towards the end of the academic year for professional practice and my marketing course. Um, and to get started, I will be first looking at the employability diagnostic results, just to get a gauge of express myself personally, my thoughts and feelings on those tests, and sort of just reflecting on those results at the beginning of the year compared to now. So for the personal resilience test, uh, I agreed for the most part, because it discussed about coping well with change, being low, and I don't disagree with that. The only thing I would like to mention is I'm someone who's very much aware of the need for change. Uh, like it's constantly happening, it's constantly needed, and for progression, you need change, for growth, for personal development, for business development. It's always dynamic, and I'm aware of that. I think my low exception of change is more so as someone who's set in their ways, as it were, someone who has strong beliefs, thoughts, and feelings on myself personally and things in life. It's something that when you have strong beliefs, you almost don't want that change, especially when your beliefs are in the most part positive. Um, But then for the personal insight or the personality insight test, I also agreed with the most part because it discussed the more introverted nature of my personality, which I do agree with. I am someone who likes to keep myself to myself. Um, Not that I have any problem expressing myself, uh, but it's something that, uh, yeah, it talked about low openness, and that was the only thing where I thought that I'm someone who's set in my ways. Not that I'm not open to change, but I try and keep things the same when possible. Uh, Throughout this year, I've done many things that I would not have thought I'd have done this time last year, uh, both inside the university and outside in my personal life, that I'm very much happy I did. And it sort of goes to show that my openness is a lot more higher than even I thought at the beginning of the year, because I would have definitely agreed with it at this point last year. But right now, I'd have argued that I'm very much open to starting new things a lot more, and it's only beneficial for me because I've learned so much more because of it. For the temperament test, I once again agreed because it talked about introverted behavior versus extroverted behavior and how I lean more towards being an introvert. And yeah, I agree with that. Um, but then it talked about if you lean more towards being a thinker or a feeler, and it said I was more of a feeler, and it's not that I'm not in touch with my emotions or that I never make decisions with my emotions, but I'm definitely someone very rational who likes to have things planned out and organized. Um, so I'd sort of disagree with that, but aside from that, everything else was very much in line with my personality. And for emotional control, it discussed like it described the sort of person that I would be, for the controlling my emotions, and it said I'm someone who, in most situations, can keep my emotions in control, which I do agree with. I feel I know the best time to express my opinion, when to keep it to myself, because I think that's a skill in itself to know when when not to say certain things at certain times. The only thing I disagreed with it was the discussion of if I got into a disagreement with someone, uh, people with my personality are more inclined to get angry as their first reaction, which I don't really agree with. I think if I have a disagreement with someone, I'm very open to discussion, conversation, as long as it's open and fair. I'm very open to talk about different opinions and thoughts and feelings on how things should be done, why people think the way they think, even if it's different to me. Uh, so I disagree with that. I feel like the only time I would ever get to a point of anger in a conversation is if the other person who has this different thoughts and feelings don't care to explain, or they're unfair and don't let other people explain theirs after. That's something that I just don't agree with, and that is something I would openly discuss with people. But aside from that, I didn't really agree. Moving on to the competency matrix, to briefly go through what happened comparing the results at the beginning to now. So for working with others, most of my scores were 3 and 4, so mid-range to high, and not really much has changed since then. I have very similar scores now when currently doing it. I think I redid those matrix tests only a week ago, so pretty recently. The only thing I did note was my higher leadership score, which I think is all down to the experiences I've had on this master's course and the different responsibilities I've had. A lot of team working and presenting that required me to take more responsibility, which I was happy to have. So yeah, that's improved. For solving problems, they were also very similar, mid-range 3s and 4s mainly, so towards the higher end. And yeah, once again, quite similar, because most were high, and I'd like to think that I've only developed for the better, so not much drop in there. In terms of positive attitude, I noted that initially a lot of my scores were high, but they were to do with the academic elements, so about your enthusiasm to learn and what you want to do in this current year. But a lot of my scores were lower for my future prospects about career and work, as I had no clue what I wanted to do. Whereas in comparison, they've only gone up slightly to the mid-range 2s and 3s, but I had some as low as 1. So I'm happy they've improved just a little bit in the past few months. And the only thing that might be noted is my enthusiasm has gone down a bit, but I think that's not because of a lack of enjoyment or that I didn't take any positives away from doing any of these modules. I think it's just because I apply myself so vigorously to these tasks that it sort of drains you a little bit. So when you reflect at the end of the year how you feel for academics compared to the beginning when I was very optimistic, the optimism has been met in the most part, but I'm now just a little bit tired, and it sort of has affected that score a little bit negatively. And for the articulating professional ideas and the professional mindset, a lot of my scores were a lot lower. Like I say, it's mainly to do with my lack of work experience, what I wanted to do in the future. It meant that most of the questions I couldn't even really give an answer to, so like not applicable for me. Whereas now, a lot of the things I've learned, as we'll touch on when I do the CPD discussion, a lot of my hours were dedicated to trying to improve that before I go into my next steps after graduating. So they've risen only a little bit because I've not gone into a workplace in the last couple of months to change that. But it's definitely improved, and I think that's a benefit. Moving on, then I'll be very quick that I think just over 20 hours of CPD, mainly linked to LinkedIn courses suggested from different modules, including the professional development and some suggested from some creative marketing modules. They were all mainly done in the first place because when they're suggested, you think, well, they're going to apply to my learning currently. But a lot of them I also took away long-term benefits, especially things to do with the team working. I'm so glad I did that quite early on because the amount of teamwork I've done throughout this year and the skills I learned from there have been applied really well. And then the things about I learned to drive this year, so I talk about those hours as that was a personal goal of mine, mainly because it tackled the idea of anxiety towards doing things like that, like practical learning as opposed to theoretical learning. Um, it was something I wasn't open to at first, but once I started doing it, I was very happy to reap the benefits because I did personally achieve that goal. I've now learnt to drive, finally at 22. But yeah, I'm really happy I did that. And then just some other things like experiences working as a voluntary consultant for a small business and assisting in their marketing decisions to do with primary research, social media content, uh, advertising and leaflet distribution. And they're all things that I discuss in PebblePad in a bit more depth, but they're all things that definitely helped my personal development throughout this year. So moving on to the first 5 questions. Um, what research have you done to help you understand more about UN Sustainable Development Goals and why they matter? Well, first off, I've not done a lot of research currently. I was actually an NTU student at my undergrad, and it was something that was constantly addressed, shown, applied to most modules. Sustainability is quite big at the university. That I'm sure loads of people will now be aware of. So it wasn't something new to me this year. So in terms of research, a lot of my research actually I could maybe link to one of my modules required a creative idea to do with a marketing campaign, uh, but it was to do with helping the UN with ageism as a concept, and it had many marketing elements. But for research, I looked at the current Sustainable Development Goals and how they could apply to the concept of ageism. And I looked again, and it just sort of reinformed all these different issues that that always matter, and it's more so shocking that these goals have been around for so long, and the fact that they're not addressed to the full extent, in my opinion, is something that needs to be addressed more, but especially in the business environment and marketing. I'm so glad that I got the opportunity to do that module, because that campaign applied to a really positive concept in trying to improve something in the world, and I think that's something that marketing has the ability to do, like the ability to communicate between a business and a customer. It doesn't just have to be for business benefits, but can be for global benefits, and not enough recognition is given to those sort of campaigns. But yeah, moving on to reflecting on your knowledge and experiences this year, how I believe I could make a difference in relation to the global goals. To be honest, I think I've just sort of touched on it, is that module opened my eyes to what I can do once I've got this degree and get into the working world. That ability to be a part of something, to try and make campaigns that benefit not just businesses but people. Uh, I think that if I could one day be involved in a marketing campaign that has long-term sustainable and global benefits to the environment, to people, to communities, it's something that I wouldn't say I've now made a goal for myself, but it's something that I'd really, really appreciate to have as a almost like a legacy sort of thing. It's something I never considered doing. Obviously, you always considered marketing, business, advertising, but you don't just like think about all these wider things that it can affect. And yeah, the difference I could make is hopefully one day being part of a team or business that makes uses my knowledge and my skills learned through marketing and personal development to hopefully make a better change. So what do I understand by the term responsible management, and why do I think it matters? So for me, if I was to just define it, responsible management to me is not just being responsible for the people internally that you manage and you work for in the business, but externally taking responsibility for understanding that you have power and influence to affect those around you outside of a business, because you make just key decisions that affect the business internally, but those people who work for you have lives outside of work. Your business will be influencing people outside of your work. And for me, a responsible manager is someone who takes those things into account in their decision making, and when they do that, I think their decision making is a lot more beneficial. When you're a bit more empathetic towards people in your decision making, you're more responsible, in my opinion. And by taking that responsibility, it's also key to recognize management as uh, someone who isn't just a leader. It's just someone like they don't just make the decisions; they do the work themselves. They take on the responsibility of doing that extra bit to make sure the business benefits, and like I say, all the other things, the local communities, the global issues that the business may be able to influence. And yeah, a responsible manager is someone who takes those things into account and strives to better those external and internal people and other elements. In my opinion, what are the top three characteristics of a successful manager? Um, and how close do you feel you are in reflecting these characteristics? So I did note down three main ones. I think a manager's got to be driven, because I think without motivation to want to do better for themselves and others in the business, without that drive, uh, there's no reason for them to be working hard, and if they don't want to actually do what they are doing, they're not going to get the best work produced. It's not going to be as good as someone who wants to actually do what they are aiming towards, like they aren't actively participating. And I mean, for me, I can't apply it as a manager per se, but I'm definitely driven in that when I know what I want to do, though sometimes as a negative of myself, I do take a while, find out what I want to do. I sometimes leave it to the last minute, and I like to leave my options open, but by doing that, I'm not always concrete in what I want to do. So, but once I have made that decision, I'm very driven. I make sure I do the best to meet my goals, meet the goals given to me. Um, and yeah, I do have drive internally to do the best for me when I apply myself, and that's what I want to do all the time. And the second one is empathetic, which I talked about for responsible management. I think if you aren't empathetic of the people you affect, you aren't really taking these people into account, and you can't manage people if you don't know what they might be thinking or feeling. Um, and that then links to my third characteristic would be to be inclusive, almost like a democratic leader. Is that in that it's really important for a manager to not just think for themselves. And what I've learned a lot this year through collaboration, you can learn so much. Uh, and as a manager or a leader, whatever word you want to use, you can't be successful without considering others. It's not just a solo project. It's not something you can just do on your own. You just maybe as a manager take that extra responsibility. But yeah, those are my three key things. And for me, especially for inclusivity, I'm very much happy to get everyone involved. I feel that what I've just expressed is important for that success as a manager. Is also important for me in succeeding in my university life and my future work, hopefully, whether that be in management or just uh, working under a manager. I want to be included. I want to feel included. I want to include others. Um, and finally, what key things have you learned from working as part of a culturally diverse team? Well, I think I've touched on that again, is that I worked in so many teams this year with different people, people of different cultures as well. I think the main thing I've learned is there can be good and bad things. People think differently, and in terms of collaboration, it's always good to have more ideas than just one. You might get a spark of inspiration that you didn't have before by having people from different backgrounds have different perspectives on things, and I think that's always good. I think the only time it can be negative is if someone's perspective uh, isn't valued, or maybe they're too aggressive with it. I have had experience of people working in a team this year who have their idea, but they're very aggressive with it, and they don't consider the other people and their ideas, and it's not always the best idea. And that's probably when it gets to the worst part, is trying to express that without offending people. Where for me, that's something that I try and consider. Whereas working with other people, they can be quite open about it, and that brings challenges with dealing with confrontation, which yeah, something I've actually benefited from. I do think I've had to take that role on this year in working with a group more than once, in having to be a middleman almost and make sure everyone's opinion is valued and taken into consideration. Um, but yeah, I think it takes different cultural experiences and perspectives to actually get to a place where you feel more you're more open and you benefit from it. Without different perspectives, and you're just too narrow-minded. Even if you don't want to be, you've not got anything else to go off. And the best thing I've learned from having a diverse team is so many different ideas that you wouldn't consider yourself, and that collaboration to make sure the best idea is utilized. And finally, just thank you for listening. I've really enjoyed my personal development this year, and I hope it's reflected through this video and through my Pebble Pad. And yeah, thank you very much for listening.